Well, good evening to everybody. Glad you're here tonight. And once again, welcome to Midweek, the Midweek community. If you had a chance to look at the church bulletin this last Sunday, the lead article was written by Tom Alexander. And down toward the end, I think it's almost the next to the last paragraph, if you still have that to go back and look at it, he quotes Neil Pryor's mom, who gives him advice just as he's getting ready to go off to school. She says to him, choose your friends from the Wednesday night crowd. So you guys get high marks tonight. I think that's a tribute. Anything coming from the Pryor family, I would consider a compliment. And we're thrilled that you're part of the midweek community. And for those of you who are online tonight, we thank you for joining us again as well. I hope you've had a good week. We're going to start tonight. You can see we're going to talk about protecting innocence. And I want to begin with a little excerpt from the Old Testament. And if you'll just kind of file back through your memory and consider Solomon for just a minute. It's really the tale of two mothers. As we think back, he's early into his reign. He's on the throne. He's asked God for wisdom. It's been granted. And so now it's put to the test. And we know the story, the two mothers, each with a baby. One baby dies, and they each claim the surviving baby. They present the case to Solomon. And in the process, he listens to the argument. They talk with one another. They make their case. And he basically winds up saying, okay, it's your word against your word. We don't have DNA testing. I can't prove that. So we'll just divide the baby. You each take half. Now, we know how that story ends, and it's really a tribute to the wisdom of Solomon to tap into the heart of parenting with that. Because as we remember, the mother who lost the baby was perfectly happy for neither to have a child. The mother of the surviving baby did what a parent does. They gave up what she gave up, what was dearest to her, in order to provide the very best outcome for the child that she loved. So I think in just that one little snippet there, we get an insight, a glimpse of parenting at its best and parenting at its worst. On the one hand, we have a mother who is very self-centered, who is not remorseful a bit at the loss of this child, or the loss of her friend's child, even under the circumstances. And then we see the very best response, which is a mom who is willing to sacrifice everything for this child. And so when it's at its best, we are really capable, we're really equipped to take care and to protect the innocence of our children. And so tonight, that's what I want to look at, is the importance of protecting the innocence and how do we go about doing that. I was reminded just this week of a story. It was a classroom of 5-year-olds, so if we have teachers in here who teach 5-year-olds, you'll recognize this. They were talking about Easter, and they were going along about this. One little boy jumped up and he said, I know the Easter Bunny does not bring chocolate. My mom does that. And the teacher sat there, just all these faces turn and look at her, expecting some sort of explanation of what she's supposed to do, how she's supposed to explain this. And before she can give an answer, this little girl steps up and points her finger right at the little boy, and he says, you tell your mom to stop doing that. That's the bunny's job. And I thought for a minute, that little childhood innocence was preserved just a little bit longer. But it doesn't always work that way, because there are poignant moments when the innocence of our worldview really just comes crashing down. This may look familiar. For a long time, I don't think I ever saw this part of The Wizard of Oz because it was always on Sunday night. It would start at 5 o'clock. We would go to church. You'd see about the first 30 minutes, and then it would be over before you would come home. But thanks to technology and the opportunity to see it whenever you want to, This is deep into the movie, as you remember. And Toto has gone up and has pulled the curtain back. And in that moment, we see, the charade that's going on. We see the showman who's acting like the wizard, pulling all the levers and everything that's happening. And just in that one little frame there, we really see evidence of trust broken. And in this situation, the hope of getting home, that's fractured, that's fallen apart. And then we see the whole security of, okay, if we can just do this, if we can just get back, if we can just get to the wizard, he'll get us home. And all of that suddenly just vanishes. So I think the takeaway from this is that, innocence is easily stolen. We don't really think of it, I don't think, as being out there and so easily taken, but it is in many ways without us ever being aware that it's happening. So I want to do a little whiteboard tonight. We haven't done this in a while, and that is to try to put together some sort of working definition of what it is to be innocent. What is innocence? We know what, it's sort of like trying to define wind and love, and you kind of know what it is, but when you try to explain it to someone, what would you say? So I'm going to move over here, and you just kind of call out just a word, a phrase, anything, but we need to have some sort of group consensus on what we're talking about. So when you hear the word innocent or you think of innocence, what comes to mind? Pure? Free of guilt? Okay. All right. What else? Unaware? Innocent. If you're turning in a test paper and the teacher said, okay, I want you to define innocent in one word, A or F, pass or fail, what would you say? You think this covers it pretty well? Pardon? Can you read it? Let me read them back in case those of you online can't see this either. Pure or purity, fear of, or free of guilt, lack of worldly knowledge, trusting, unaware. NAI? That's my fear of writing up here and misspelling stuff. So, anything else? Anything else you want to add? That's all right. I think the more ways we try to say the same thing, sooner or later it begins to gel. Anything else you want to add? All right. Are we good? All right, so now you read the board. Now tell me, what is innocent? Can we put it in the funnel? Can we put it in the crucible and turn up the heat and get a definition? Or do we just kind of have to, okay, we're just going to embrace the subjective feel about it and just go with it? Well, you may have an idea as time goes on. We're going to, and in so many ways, this is it encompasses everything that we're talking about. And I'm not going to try to boil it down. We'll just sort of see if it becomes clearer as we go along. But I think it's important as you read through this to see how fragile innocence really is. If you look at these terms that are up here, that you put up here, and how easily those things are broken. If they see a traumatic event, okay, we don't really think of PTSD being in children, but there are versions of that can be. The bad dreams at night, the things that they keep inside, that they don't feel comfortable sharing, etc., that comes from seeing this same event replayed and replayed and replayed. Betrayed trust, a promise that's broken. All of a sudden, innocence really gets shaken hard because the trusting part of that is suddenly undermined. The death of a close friend or a relative or even a pet. Suddenly, death now is on the radar, which has not been a part of that whole world of purity and being naive and being unaware of all of those kind of things. Eventually, the risk of crossing boundaries into immoral behavior. Suddenly there's a step across the line and the world looks very different all of a sudden. In fact, I saw a headline just Monday, I think it was, that says, fentanyl combined with stimulants leading to the fourth wave of U.S. overdose epidemic. So there's a whole nother world of exposure that's right there just surrounding our children all the time. All right, I want you to do something for me now. I'm going to put something up here. I want you just to look at it for a minute, and then I want you to tell me what you see. Okay, just look at it and tell me what you see. Just describe that. Fear. Shock. Protection. Anything else that came to mind when that first popped up? Hiding. Desperation. Survival. Okay, let me see if I can expand this a bit. Does it change your perception if we take a step back and we look at it from this perspective? What do you see now? Anything differently? Fear comes to the surface now. See that a little more clearly. Everything that you said on the first that you saw in the mother's eyes and in the embrace of that child, you now see it in this frame, but there's a kind of a why behind it now. All of a sudden we begin to see, okay, why is that mother afraid? Why is she holding that baby so tightly? What is it that's going on? Well, this painting is actually from 1824 by a French artist, and you can see the title of this. It's The Scene of the Massacre of the Innocents, innocent being the children. The scene of the massacre of the innocents. And it depicts in the painting basically the threat to the baby boys of Bethlehem. It captures that emotion of parental responsibility. You see the mom and the baby hiding, trying to protect. And really, I think the painting is more powerful because we know the backstory. If you just see the painting, you didn't have to have the whole story to get those emotions from the painting. But when you know the backstory, the dimension becomes even deeper. Herod the Great, was at the center of this infanticide. He was client king of Rome. He was on the throne in Judea. He was notorious for his building projects, the Temple Mounts to his credit, but he was ruthless. He was paranoid. He was suspicious of any threat to his throne, even to the point that he murdered one of his wives and 3 of his sons, and probably anybody else who looked at him the wrong way. He was a desperate person to stay in control. Jerusalem was a very busy place, but it wasn't so busy that he couldn't keep up with word on the street. So when the Magi show up, he gets the message that they're nosing around. They're asking questions, that they want to know, where is this baby that's supposed to become king of the Jews? So he does what everybody does in a crisis. He calls a committee meeting, and he brings in the teachers and the Pharisees, and he says, tell me where it is that the baby is supposed to be born. And so they quote for him this messianic prophecy. But I want to give it to you in two ways. I don't know that it's really that much different, but when you hear it a little differently, it's almost like, how did Herod hear it? So if you read Micah chapter 5, verse 2, this is what it says. And this would have been the prophecy that they're quoting for him. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from of old, from ancient times. Now, I guess if you had quoted that verbatim, that's the way it would have sounded. But they give it to him in probably the way I'm giving it to you tonight. They're sort of making it fit the audience, sort of giving him the information in a paraphrase. And so this is the way it's recorded in Matthew. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel. Now, if you were Herod and you heard those words and you were already paranoid that somebody was going to take what you had, that's pretty succinct. That's cut and dried. That's cut to the bottom of this page and tell me what's going on. And there's somebody out there that's going to take what you've got. Okay? So Herod heard enough at that point. He calls in the Magi. He says, I think, according to my sources, if you want to find this baby, you go to Bethlehem. And when you get there, kind of check it out and then let me know if it's a spin on it, because I want to honor him. I want to worship him as well. So the Magi head off to Bethlehem. We know the story. They're excited. The star's now leading them just like it did to get them to that point. It stops over the house. They go inside. They have this wonderful baby shower. They worship the baby. They present these very, very expensive gifts. And now it's time to go home. But God sends them a message in a dream that says, bypass Herod. Don't go there. So they reset the GPS and they go home a different route. Herod could be very engaging when it was to his political advantage. But he was cold-blooded when he was threatened. In this case, the Magi foiled his plan, and there was a price to pay. And so that's our text tonight. And Danny, let me bring you this, and Danny's going to read for us. If you have your Bible and want to follow along here.
Be reading from Matthew chapter 2, beginning in verse 13. After the wise men left, an angel of the Lord came to Joseph in a dream. The angel said, "Get up, take the baby and his mother and escape to Egypt. Herod will start looking for the baby. Herod wants to kill him. So stay in Egypt until I tell you it's safe." So Joseph got up and left for Egypt with the baby and the baby's mother. They left during the night. Joseph stayed in Egypt until Herod died. This happened to make clear the full meaning of what the Lord said through the prophet. The Lord said, "I called my son to come out of Egypt." Herod saw that the wise men had fooled him. Herod was very, very angry. So Herod gave an order to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and in all the area around Bethlehem. Herod had learned from the wise men the time the baby was born. It was now 2 years from that time. So Herod said to kill all the boys that were 2 years old and younger. So the thing God said through the prophet Jeremiah happened. A sound was heard in Ramah. It was bitter crying and much sadness. Rachel cries for her children, and she cannot be comforted, because her children are dead. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord came to Joseph in a dream. This happened while Joseph was in Egypt. The angel said, "Get up, take the baby and his mother, and go to Israel. The people that were trying to kill the baby now are dead." So Joseph took the baby and the baby's mother and went to Israel. But Joseph heard that Archelaus was now king in Judah, and Archelaus became king when his father Herod died. So Joseph was afraid to go there. Joseph was warned in a dream. So Joseph left there and went to the area of Galilee. And Joseph went into a town called Nazareth and lived there. And so the thing happened that God said through the prophets. God said that the Christ would be called a Nazarene.
Thank you, Danny. Well, I think parental protection of the innocents requires what we're going to refer to as active surveillance. That's a term that we use in medicine sometimes when you're talking about a risk, maybe a health issue of some sort, a cancer, that's not particularly aggressive, but it has the potential to become that. And so it doesn't require immediate attention, but it requires very close monitoring, maybe more frequent biopsy or testing to exactly know when it moves from being benign, or not benign, but less aggressive to more aggressive. There's always a treatment plan that's already been discussed. It's just on hold, waiting to be executed whenever the time comes. The life of Jesus in this situation is under God's active surveillance. And so God sends this messenger, sends his word to Joseph in the dream. And he says, you know, Herod's about to blow up. You've got to do something to protect the child. There is no hesitancy on Joseph's part. Have you noticed that? It wasn't, that sort of doesn't fit my schedule right now. You know, we've got a commitment we need to finish and then we'll go. No second thought. He just did what he had to do. He executed the plan, and the family vanished in the night. I mean, they were gone. So Joseph and Mary settle into this new life in Egypt, but they never switch off the radar on this active surveillance. News comes of changes in the political arena. God sends another message in a dream that says, Herod's dead. It's time to go home. And going back to Israel was really part of the plan all along, because the ministry of Jesus, once it was launched, was to take place there. So we're going full circle in this prophecy to get back home. And as Danny read, he would be called a Nazarene. As he goes back, Joseph takes the family back, though, Archelaus, who is now on the throne in Jerusalem, who is one of the sons of Herod the Great, who got to the throne in a dispute, actually, with a brother, turned out to be kind of messy in that whole decision process. But it's too much to be there. So they go north to Galilee, to very familiar territory, and they wind up in Nazareth. Jesus would be known as a Nazarene. Joseph provides the prototype for us for what it means to protect children. If you notice what he did not discount the warning. He didn't dismiss it. When there was evidence that there was a threat, something was about to happen, he acted. I think sometimes we want it to be different than what it is. We hope it will be different than what it is. We're just going to believe that it'll be different than what it is. But it is what it is. And in this situation, he didn't wait. He was alert, he was aware, and he acted rapidly. Life-threatening events require rapid response. How many of us have moved from one location to another when a tornado watch changed to a tornado warning. You got up, you did what you had to do to find safety. What about the folks live along the coast with the hurricanes? How many times have we seen pictures on the news where all of the highways are turned to traffic going north? There's this mass evacuation from the coast, and it has to happen within a certain amount of time before the storm hits. Well, there are storms that threaten the innocence of our children, and they require the same response. In one sense, protecting those who can't protect themselves is really our shared responsibility. That belongs to all of us. We need to be alert, and we need to protect the unborn. We need to protect those who are mentally challenged, those who are abused, those who have been abandoned, those who are neglected, young or old. But as parents, as grandparents, we have this focused response that's really zeroed in on our children and our grandchildren, that we need to be constantly assessing the risk, that we need to be ready to respond rapidly if we have to, and we need to change the circumstances if that's what it requires to protect the innocence of children. It may not be convenient. It may not be easy, but it may be very necessary. Okay. So that's protecting the innocents, the little ones, basically. And we take that from this passage that Danny read. But I want to shift the focus for the time that we have left. And that is not just protecting the little ones, the innocent ones, but to protect, what do we do to protect the innocence that we're all trying to hang on to? Innocent, just because we become aware, does that mean that we give up our innocence in the process? Let me ask you this. Does this look familiar? For those of you who teach school, ever so often I see this little reminder about this pop up. The Lost and Found box is a treasure trove. If you've ever gone through that, and things will stay in there for a very long time. People just forget that they're there. But you get this little reminder that says, go to the Lost and Found and check it out. See it, and if there's something in there that's yours, take it. Well, let's assume for a minute we go to that pile and we start rummaging through it. And we find this sack in there, and we look at the sack, and it's full of innocence. And at a closer look, we realize, oh, that's mine. It's been lost. It's been here all the time, but I didn't know where it was. Well, I know that sounds like a little bit of a stretch to illustrate it that way, but it's not unbelievable, because innocence in many ways has been lost for a very long time. There was a time when the whole world was innocent. The opening pages of Genesis, we know that everything God created was good. He said it was good. In fact, it would probably meet all of these requirements that you guys put up there when we were talking about this a few minutes ago. The first family had purpose, got up every day looking forward to the day they were going to be with God that day. God loved the innocent children who were in the garden, and Adam and Eve adored the Creator. It was a great relationship. It was innocence at its best. There was no common knowledge of evil. Okay, I think we alluded to that. Lack of worldly knowledge, ignorant bliss, unaware. That's really what you were saying earlier. There was no common awareness that anything other than good existed, because that was all locked up in this tree. And then, I don't know, maybe this is a stretch. You can think about it. It seems to me that God really didn't intend for us to share that knowledge. That it was parceled off. It was cordoned off, so that it really didn't have to taint everything else that was going on in our lives. He respected choice. I mean, it wasn't that it couldn't be, but I don't think the intention was that it had to be. So from the beginning, there was really only one choice. I mean, certainly Adam had the chance to name all the animals, and you could say he had a choice of what you wanted to call them. But there was really only one significant choice, and that was every morning, which tree do we eat from? Now, are we going to stay on the life tree today? Or is this the day we're going to just kind of ease over there and see what the other one is all about? So innocence, in a way, hinges on trust. I think that's up there as well. To choose God's way rather than to pursue this search for what we don't know, but we know it's something that's out there. And one of the issues that comes up is that if you choose sin, if you choose the knowledge of evil and act on it, the trade-off may be innocence. That may be the cost with that. So one of Satan's strategies for Adam in the very beginning, and for us even today as it continues, is to undermine that trusting relationship with God. And trust, again, made it on the board up here. So he plants this seed. It's a slow seduction, but it's a seed of doubt. Did God really say that? Are you sure he said that? Do you think that's really what he meant? So that sort of swirls around there for a while. And then he adds this little drop of envy to there, and he says, God's holding out on you. If you just eat from that tree, you'll know everything that he knows. It's going to level the playing field. And so we stew on that for a while until the morning that we make the decision that we're going to eat from that tree. And the disobedience that comes from that leaves this echoing sound in the garden of God's breaking heart. The innocence that's lost has been lost for millennia, stayed lost, was in the lost and found box until the arrival of the Savior. And so then we have this quest for innocence. We lost it. Can we get it back? Is there a way? I'm going to give you another imaginary conversation here, not one that you're going to find anywhere or Danny can read for us. But based on the things that are there, I can see God having this conversation with his son. And he says to him, at conception, I give innocence to each life that's born on earth. The problem is, they grow up and they lose it. They just keep losing it. That the lost and found box is full. And so, what do you think about going to help them reclaim it? And so they talk about this mission, that Jesus would come, that he would spend time here, that he would show us how to live innocently, that he'd show us what we lost, and then he would help us regain it, to reclaim it. So he accepts the mission, and so while he's on earth, baby, child, adolescent, adult male, he's tempted in every way, but he doesn't sin. He maintains his innocence all the way through. So it's possible to do that. And then the innocent one takes the sins that are ours and he throws them in the lost box and he pulls out our innocence and he makes it available to us again. It is possible to regain it, but the culture that we live in is very hostile to that whole process, to that whole idea. There's this relentless pursuit of our children, and to protect them requires vigilance, and vigilance requires us, it's a term that you've heard a lot lately, to make no assumptions. That we can't make any assumptions about this. You know the story of the Trojan horse in Greek mythology. The Greeks waged war on Troy because Paris had taken Helen, who was the wife of Menelaus. 10 years, the war went on. And then the Greeks do this very, very clever thing. They build the Trojan horse, load it up with an elite force, leave it at the gates of the city. The Trojan people the people of Troy think that this must be some sort of peace offering. So they don't see anybody around. They bring the horse into the city, and under the cover of night, the horse opens, or the men inside open the horse, and they sack the city from the inside out. What didn't work from the outside in worked from the inside out. The Trojan horse worked because the people of Troy assumed that there was no risk. Now, fast forward the 1970s, there's the surge of computer technology going on. And this metaphor, this image, becomes the reference, the Trojan horse, of any malware that shows up on your computer that misleads us, that it's there, but its true intention is disguised. So that if you download it or you open it or you access it in any way, it gives remote access to somebody who can be thousands of miles away to your personal information. Okay. Your security is breached, at that point. So the loss of security, even in a more current idea, comes when we assume that the message that shows up on our computer screen is free of risk. It's an assumption. Okay? And so at a casual look, just a quick look at it, we assume that it's innocent. But the ability to destroy the innocence of our trust and our belief in our information is cleverly disguised. I want to try to keep the class as current as we can, so I want to give you two examples of what this looks like in current time, real time. Earlier this week, I was talking with a grandmother, and I just at one point asked, how was her family? How were things going? And there was this long pause. And before she explained anything, she said, I just didn't know. And then she launched into this story that her son's life was falling apart, that his wife had died from alcoholism-related illnesses, that he himself had become an alcoholic. There's a 10-year-old child in the house. Her husband was there for the last 3 weeks trying to help them pull things together. And then at the end, she said, I didn't know because before he was of legal age to buy alcohol for himself, someone where he worked was buying it for him. And then there was another long pause. And she says, my children are very far from the Lord, and I don't know if they're going to be in heaven. And that was 2 days ago. I heard a news story last week about parents who were unaware that their young daughter, who they dropped off at school, was picked up after the 8 o'clock bell, trafficked during the day, brought back to school before the 3:15 bell, went home, never told parents, under the threat that the family would be killed if she divulged the information. The parents never knew while it was going on that the innocence of their daughter was being taken. I think, there's a tendency for us to get in a setting and we think about that's a problem somewhere else. That belongs to somebody else's community. It's not an issue. But those are stories that, just sort of rise up among our community. These are our families, our neighbors, our friends who are dealing with how do you protect the innocence of your children in a culture that very much doesn't care about that. If we move this back into Scripture, I think like all of us, Mary and Joseph made an assumption that resulted in a wake-up call for them. I think we've all had a wake-up call. Hopefully not anything as disastrous as what I've just described for you. But their experience convinced them that they had to be in it. They had to be all in, parenting that protects innocent for the long haul. That there wasn't any bailing along the way, that they just had to stay in the trench. I don't think we're going to have time to read this, but in Luke chapter 2, the passage is 41 through 52 verses. And it's the story where Jesus is now 12 years old. He's on a field trip with his folks. He gets separated. His parents made an erroneous assumption. When they realized that he wasn't with them, they made the assumption that he was with family or friends, that they were all traveling together, that he was fine, there wasn't anything to worry about. But after they'd been gone a day, they realized that they had made an error in that assumption. And so they go back and they start looking for him frantically. And they, of course, you know the story, they find him in the temple, and he's with very knowledgeable people. He's exchanging this conversation. But look at his age. He's 12 years old. He's ready to transition to junior high school. He was very precocious. He could have made a 36 on the ACT or a 1600 on the SAT at that time. He could have been captain of the robotics team. But Joseph and Mary make an extraordinary decision. They push back really hard against what culture would have told them to do. A culture that would have claimed the innocence of Jesus before his time. And what did they do? They took him home. And they created this space and this time for him to learn how to personally protect his own innocence. And they began to relinquish the management of managing innocence to him. That they began to step back. They began to allow him to do that. And the scripture, I think, really gives us a peek into that, because it says that he grew in wisdom, that he had time to engage the world, that had no respect for innocence. It wasn't just knowledge. Now he was gaining an insight to how he was going to manage himself when the time came. He grew in stature, in stamina, how to deal with not just physically growing, but how to manage stress, how to manage confrontation, which was going to characterize everything that he did going forward. He grew in a relationship with his heavenly Father. He had opportunity to talk to him. We call it prayer. But he began to draw on the support and the encouragement of what he was going to need. And he grew in favor with his neighbors. He began to experience what it is to serve people, because that's what's going to be his whole mission. He was going to celebrate the lives of other folks. And so there was a period of time here. We just assume, and maybe rightfully so, maybe I'm wrong, we just assume that he knew all of this stuff. But it says he grew in these ways. There had to be an opportunity for him to grow. And it was in a safe place that his earthly parents allowed that to happen. They gave him a safe space to ask questions. I'm going to reference Neil Pryor again. He says that there are 3 questions that every student needs answered before the student can ever listen to anything else you have to say. I'm going to say that those questions actually are in the heart of every child. And every child needs these answered by attentive parents, or else they're going to seek the answers somewhere else. And the price for that may be their innocence. So let me, before we run out of time, these are the 3 questions. Do you like me? Am I worth anything? Am I worth protecting? Will I make it? How do our children know if we like them? Do we compliment them often? Do we listen when they speak to us? Do we listen well enough that we can remember the details of what they've said to us? Do we make direct eye contact? Believe it or not, when you do that and you sustain it, there's actually a release of oxytocin. You moms will know that as the hormone that causes labor to begin and helps with lactation. But it also generates a sense of well-being, of trust, when you maintain eye contact. Children need to know that we like them well enough to ask hard questions. And it's a real blessing when we do that. I have a friend recently whose son is 14, had seen some things that he knew he shouldn't have seen, wanted to talk to his dad about it, didn't know how to get the conversation started, came into his dad, he said, I need to talk to you. And fortunately, my friend was aware enough that he knew this could go south as far as being really embarrassing for everyone. And so he just opened it up. He said, look, whatever you've got to tell me is probably going to be really awkward for both of us. So let's just admit that on the front end, and let's just say what we need to say. By doing that, when he gave him that opportunity, it allowed his son to offload this burden that was really stressing his innocence. And when we ask those questions, and maybe it's about a risky relationship, maybe it's about a struggle with temptation, maybe it's about a social rejection, maybe it's about bullying, I don't know what it may be, but something needs to be addressed. And we have to get to that point where we can say, I like you, I will always like you, but we need to figure out what's unlikable about this situation. It doesn't have anything to do with our relationship, but it has everything to do with what's going on. So we need to figure this out. So how do our children know if we think that they're worth anything? Let me ask it another way. How do they know if we devalue them? Do we make promises that we don't keep? Then they decide they're not even worth a promise. Do we criticize them in public? And do they decide that they're not valuable enough to us that we're even willing to shield their struggles from public scrutiny? Do we focus on their shortcomings? And do they think, well, I'm not important enough to even be worth them applauding my effort, even if it's not a great outcome, or willingness to teach me how to do it better? Now that's a way we can translate a message that says, you're not worth much. But how do you do it on the other way? How do you help your children or grandchildren or your students in class know that you value them? Well, if you give value, you give time. That's a lot of bleacher sitting. That's road trips to places that you probably didn't want to go. That's a game night at home. That's reading a bedtime story. That's conversation at the dinner table. That's celebrating worship. Give value, give time. But you also give value when you give commitment. And the commitment is to know the influencers of your children. Now, I just sort of made that term up in this, but anybody who has access or opportunity to influence your children's decision would fall into that category. You know, the Rhodes Rowdies used to have this T-shirt. I haven't seen it in a long time, but it said, "Our house, our rules." You know, it was sort of that in your face that you know, when you're here, you know, we play by our rules. You know, we're in charge of what's happening. But there was a time when that was much more believable. You know, we grew up on the farm. We all did things together. We knew what was going on. But there can be no assumptions when it comes to influencers. And this is not bashing anybody, but we need to know their friends. We need to know their teachers. We need to know their coaches. We need to know their babysitters. We need to know the daycare workers. And it takes time to have no assumptions. No influencer deserves to be criticized if we don't know them. No child deserves a loss of innocence from misused authority. Okay. Well, the last thing, and then we'll quit because it looks like we're out of time here, is will I make it? And I would say we'll end on this, that you have to show them how. Medicine, see one, do one, teach one. You show them, you let them try it, and then they reinforce it by passing it on. So if we do well, if we offer children affirmation, security, example, and time to understand what they need to protect their own innocence, then we will have done well to teach them. Thank you all so much. And next week is lectureship, and then we'll be back in 2 weeks.